If there is one show out there that made the biggest impact of last year's fall season, then you don't need a bachelor's degree in behavioral science to know that it was Goblin Slayer. A polarizing show where its first episode caused such bedlam in the anime community that Crunchyroll had to put warning signs whenever a new episode came out, and content creators who had opinions about it were swiftly and, dare I say, unfairly attacked. Because this is the internet, and here, different mindsets are completely irrelevant and your ideas are bullshit no matter what. You know, the internet. Because fuck your opinion. If you guys watched my previous video, Goblin Slayer is Important, you know that I quite enjoyed the series while it was airing. The main character was interesting with a lot of character depth, and the idea of making this whole thing basically a bad dice roll in D&D was exhilarating fun. But the more I started to watch it, the more I suddenly found some problems with the show. Its animation wasn't always the best, and it can be chalked down to being mildly serviceable at best. And every other character that doesn't have an addiction of goblin genocide in their mind were kinda lackluster. Despite some nicks in the armor, Goblin Slayer was one of, if not the most popular show on Crunchyroll. It was neck and neck with shows like That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime and Bunny Girl Senpai for top spots, and while not as highly regarded as those two previously mentioned, it has quite a following. In the early fall update, Goblin Slayer was the most watched anime in the majority of the world, and whether or not it still remained on top of the other contenders near the end, it was, well, quite impressive. Plus, I think it'll be fondly looked back at as a show that will revitalize the dark fantasy genre, something I think was really starting to die out in no small part to the disaster that was Berserk 2016. That is why it is an important show to note this year. Not a great one, but it's got a lot of good stuff to enjoy. But the first episode definitely poisoned the well in the beginning. So in today's little video, we'll be touching on its harsh beginnings up to its climactic conclusion and help present a fair trial. I'm gonna be your judge here for today, and we'll be hearing testimonies, cross-examinations, and a final deliberation to figure out what makes Goblin Slayer in many people's eyes a bad show, and why it's also a good show. The good, the bad, and the goblin. So let's begin with episode 1, where the incident takes place at. 4 adventurers decide to proceed headlong to a cave to kill goblins and free several women taken hostage, all without buying potions or wearing protective armor. Unsurprisingly, they get wrecked. 2 of the party members are poisoned and killed, and the female fighter tries to fend off the swarm, but she gets overwhelmed and is raped in front of a support priest before being dragged off and going through God knows what. This is a scene where everyone has problems with. The way it's shot can be seen as voyeuristic or distasteful. The slow pans, the ripping of the clothes, and even the way the goblins kind of leave just enough space for the audience to get a peek at can seem like something out of a pornographic video. The claws digging into the thighs, the screams of horror, and the uncomfortable movement of the unconscious woman's body is hard to watch. This happens in under 10 minutes of the very first episode, and at this point, this is already splitting cliffs. Women are referred to as playthings or breeding material if you go to the light novel, and are treated as slaves or human meat shields to goblins. They are abused, they are tortured, and shattered for the pleasure of the goblins, and in the series terms, paints these monsters as pure evil. Now, of course, if that is the way to make goblins the enemy, then for some people, it's a pretty disgusting excuse. And in this age where gender equality and even a general distaste for rape in media is more prevalent in entertainment today, Goblin Slayer did not play this the smart way. The next problem is in adapting the source material to make better sense of the situations our characters get into. Before their annihilation by the goblins, each member has a small, insignificant flashback that tells of their ambitions to be great adventurers. One wants to be a dragon slayer, another wants to follow in her father's footsteps, and the last is a prodigy who is destined for great feats. All meet their ends in horrific manners, and while the stories really don't help with their character personalities, it can be still quite depressing to see their dreams cut short in part due to a lack of knowledge of the goblin mindset. If this part was set in the show, many of the deaths and even the sexual assault can have more meaning. Not a lot, but still something. There are many scenes in Goblin Slayer outside of episode 1 that are also problematic and miss out on minute details that flesh out motivations or understanding. Like in episode 9, where Goblin Slayer confronts a sword maiden in the courtyard about why she sent him and his party to a highly infested goblin den. In the light novel and in the manga, the scene is drawn out like something that deeply affects her. She has post-traumatic stress about the experience and is acutely aware of the goblin's ways as she was a victim of it. She also shows fascination to Goblin Slayer himself, and how he can go into that danger over and over again despite the risk of death looming over him. In the anime, they talk about the exact same thing, but it doesn't take full advantage of its visuals. With the manga, you can see goblins crawling all over her laying in the darkness, completely helpless. It's only with Goblin Slayer's words that the Sword Maiden's fears are extinguished, and her adoration for him is clear, even to the point where the light shines so bright, even she can't see him. The anime never takes full advantage of it, and just opts to just show the two talking in a courtyard at night with very uninteresting shot compositions. As such, the anime misses many minor details that can add to the scenes presented, and that could be more damning than the awkward 3D rendered Goblin Slayer. So we have the main problems out in the open: the portrayal of women and adapting book to screen. We have to ask ourselves the hard questions, and I'm not going to do a whataboutism on this because everyone has. Several factors play into this, and I just want to stick with what divided Goblin Slayer from being fully appreciated. So with all the controversial stuff out of the way, let's look at what Goblin Slayer did to rectify the shortcomings. The scenes of little but significant portions are cut out, and for me, I wish they weren't since they are necessary to develop character. But when they adapt scenes that are big action set pieces like the battle with the ogre, the Goblin Champion, and the Goblin King, it is good dark fantasy fun. My favorite is definitely when our heroes are backed into a corner and Goblin Slayer with little strength left takes strands of human hair to strangle and incapacitate the leader. The voice of his master condescendingly jeering him in his mind as he struggles to keep fighting. If the show knows what to do best in, it's getting us to be invested in the moment. And yeah, like many, I do criticize the CG bits, but at some points they do some pretty cool moments with it. Like when Goblin Slayer slashes some goblins as the camera circles around in slow motion. It does look a bit jarring close up, but the way the camera swings and the blood just floats, it's a cool ass shot regardless, and there are several moments in the show where the animation definitely looks great. I just wish it was in most of the show. Okay, adaptations are one thing, but what about the portrayal of female characters as tasteless titillation for the audience? Now the show does have moments of perversion, like in the baths or while helping Goblin Slayer recover, which, by the way, he must be truly insane if he doesn't take full advantage of the opportunity to get with the Sword Maiden. Now you might say, what about the priestess? She's 15. Yeah, why don't you take a seat over there? But there are still a good chunk of girl power in the show, and Sword Maiden was the most interesting female character in the female entourage. Priestess is more a poster girl, and High Elf Archer has a skill with a bow, but the chest of an anvil. Sword Maiden is a survivor, and despite her skill in defeating one of the most powerful threats to the world, shudders to that of measly goblins because of what they did to her decades ago. On the surface, she has serenity and grace, yet hides the secret of keeping goblins under her city to see if the fear she felt would still resonate with the citizens. She wanted to share her pain, and Goblin Slayer shocks her to the core when he denies a mutual understanding. For a character who only was in a couple of chapters and a handful of scenes, she definitely was the most complex. Other than how the hell can she keep those giant melons in her robe? Also, is it a bit cold in here? Now honestly, having one very strong female character might not excuse the other ones, and if we are trying to break the barrier on what is acceptable in media versus what is not acceptable, that discussion is way too broad a scope to even fathom for a 10 to 15 minute video. Let's just say this. People have tastes, and if they hate something for what it represents in their eyes, we just have to accept it. I can understand the rape scene is a terrible one, but another might say it's totally fine and just makes the situation more dire. It doesn't make you a rape denier or a monster, it just makes you someone who can handle it. I raised this issue with my friends about this scene, and one was not at all mad about the rape scene in Goblin Slayer. But he was upset with Berserk's infamous scene when he watched it. He found it to be too much and felt that it dragged on long and was too graphic for his tastes. I have a similar issue with the scene in Sword Art Online Alicization when two guys bind two helpless girls and are about to rape them. They aren't monsters, they are literal human beings about to force themselves on their victims for 3 straight minutes. Now, regardless of context, SEO has been a really bad purveyor of giving strong female written characters room to be more than just objectifications. Remember the last episode of the first SEO series? Not trying to open the can of worms that is Sword Art Online or anything, but despite me and others hating those scenes for their content, other people find them to be tense moments of tragedy and build up to when the villains finally get their comeuppance. As the saying goes, similar folks, different strokes. So the verdict is rather biased in my personal feelings with the show. I like the show. I thought it was engaging for the most part, and I never felt like my time was wasted. Though, The first episode's disputable sexual assault is a poorly handled mess that most definitely split the fandom, and honestly, if you fail at a first impression, you're gonna fail to get them again. But I'd say it got right back on its feet, and despite a stumble, it finished quite strong, and it's one I recommend watching for viewers that are wanting more out of fantasy anime. Maybe be warned that the first episode is kind of a barrier of entry, and that it's not a great medal contender if you're looking for strong, female-represented shows. All in all, Goblin Slayer is a mixed bag, but one I felt is vital to talk about. It was a show that spiced up the fantasy roll call of anime, and got some steam rolling for more like this to come out. Goblin Slayer is still important in the grand scheme of things, and sure, we can debate all day long about it, but as long as you don't act like goblins in the show, then maybe the community can live a lot more peacefully without it. But if you can't stay in your holes and start to harass honest folks online who have a different opinion, let me say, I know a guy who loves to slay goblins. Thanks for sticking around. This was a very uncomfortable subject, but I felt it was important to highlight to wrap up what Goblin Slayer meant for the community. If you're going to comment, please do it with the utmost respect and treat others like how they would treat you. Also, subscribe and ring the notification bell to see my uploads. It's your bra man saying goodnight.